in society about it. It's just sort of interesting to observe, just from a character standpoint, just a humanity standpoint. And I'm sad that a couple of rare exceptions, I really have not heard God interjected into this discussion at all. I mean, I think I heard Kathy Lee Gifford say she was praying from Mount Lauer. I think that's about all I've heard as far as anybody's faith being interjected. And for those of y'all who don't know, Jim Dennison is a guy. He's a former pastor. He pastored a big Baptist church out in Texas. And now what he does is he writes commentaries on cultural, kind of with a faith perspective. That's where this came from. It's out of a daily email. But I wanted to talk about kind of just three biblical concepts that he talks about towards the end of the article. Because I think, whether it's the sexual stuff or any other kinds of sin, I think all of these things are applicable to our lives. So the first is that private sin never stays private. And when I first think about private sin, I always think about my thought life. And I think one of my biggest sin natures and a lot of my biggest convictions comes from my thought life. Because, as a matter of course, I'm not out killing anybody, or I'm not out stealing, I hope I'm not out lying, or, whatever. But my thought life is something that I often struggle with. So when I think of private sin, that's what I think of. Now, I'm not quite sure how you would refer to these issues as being private sin, because obviously, you've got one person engaged in some manner with one or more other people, and so by its very essence, it's not private when it's going on. But it strikes me that these guys, and I don't know if it's ego or power or whatever, they're doing this stuff, and they say, well, nobody's ever going to find out about this because the person who's the one that's being offended is not going to say anything. But the point he makes here is that private sin never stays private, and we all know, if nothing else, God's always aware of it, right? So our thought lives and whatever else we may do, God is watching us, and so hopefully as men of faith, we're driven by the fact, and we always talk about the audience of one in here. Hopefully we're driven by the fact that we don't want to do these kinds of things or sin. I mean, we all sin obviously, but we don't want to consciously do this kind of stuff because we know that God is watching us when we do it. And so it's just we think Jim talks about, we think these things don't apply to us, and when we're tempted with private immorality, the tempter being Satan wants us to believe that such sin will remain private and nobody will be hurt by it. Now that's another interesting concept. I mean, you hear people talk about doing things, and you hear this term victimless crime. You ever heard that term? People do things. It's like, well, what no harm, no foul. And it's like, marijuana is in the news a lot now. Who's it harming if I smoke a little weed or whatever? And you hear people talk about like that, but I think people are not really thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. I mean, because think about something like coveting, or think about something like lust. You got all this stuff rolling around in your mind, and you got this covetous or this prideful or this lustful attitude in your mind. You might think that it's a victimless crime, but have you ever considered, even subconsciously, how it might affect your behaviors and how it might affect your interactions with others that you encounter? I mean, and lust seems to be a very good example. If you're lusting, how is that going to impact a relationship with your spouse? I mean, and she may not know specifically about it. But how is that going to impact that relationship? So I think these things, these so-called private sins that we think may be victimless, the truth is they're really not victimless at all. I think y'all heard me when Gary was speaking last week, and I'll say this again for anybody that missed. The talk at your buddy at the CLC breakfast was very, very powerful. He talked about the fact that he'd gone, he had committed adultery, and he and his wife had gone to counseling, and part of the counseling process was the counselor stood up there, and everybody had to basically draw their family tree, let's call it all the way back to like your great-great-grandparents. So you put all these squares up there with your family tree, and the next part of it was, well, color it in red where there's been alcoholism, or color it in with blue where there's been spousal abuse, or color it in with green where there's been this or that or the other. And the guy that was speaking to us said it struck him that, when my grandkids get up and do this, my square is going to be colored in, as somebody that cheated on my wife. And so generations down the road, that's going to be put up there. So I think we need to be very, very careful. And it's the Bible talks a good bit about not only generational sin, but generational blessings, going from today, generation after generation. So to the extent we think that something's private, it's not going to affect anybody, I think we got to be very careful about that mindset. So I'll pause there for a second. Anybody thoughts so far?
Yeah, but a couple. I don't know where it is, but how it's some verse, but it says how things will escalate. Sin doesn't. And Ken talks about this too. You don't lust thinking that eventually you're going to get caught cheating. So the escalation, but the nature of sin is you need a little bit more each time, and so it starts off in your head, and then maybe you look a little longer, maybe all of a sudden, then all of a sudden you would, the escalation factor would go in there. But I think there's also the part that gets me too is I think that any of those things, even if from the world's eyes it's not bad, you're choosing at that moment to be your own God. Because we all sit in this room, we all know what God says about a certain issue. And if you're choosing at that point in time to say, well, he'll forgive me, I'm just going to do this right now, then that moment you're actually putting more trust in yourself than you're putting in God. Because why would God tell you to do something and you're like, it's not that big of a deal.
Absolutely. And the thing about it is, there's any number of examples we could talk about. It starts out as being a private sin. But how easily can it become, an overt sin and something that you're actually doing? So consider lust. Consider the mindset of lust. And you might think, well, it's just in my mind. But how far removed are you from an actual adulterous act or some other act along those lines? Consider coveting. You say, well, gosh, I wish I had a bigger house, or I wish I had a nicer car, or whatever. How far removed is that from cutting corners and trying to screw somebody on your next deal? Or how far is that, maybe on a little bit different level, how far is that from stealing something? Stealing money because you want to go buy something. We can go on and on about those kinds of things, but to your point, it starts out as something that you think is very harmless, but the devil is a lot smarter than we are, and he's just sitting there waiting for it to get to that next level.
What you think about the actual moment that you are comparing, or you're coveting, or whatever, you're ultimately comparing. It's a pretty non-joyful moment.
Yeah.
Talking to a friend of mine 2 days ago, he just spent the night in Butler Cabin, two nights ago. I'm like, you could easily go, man, I spent the night at Augusta, it was pretty nice, But you gotta stop that real quick, because it's not a fun, joyful moment.
That's a great point. You think about that. You're sitting there, and rather than enjoying that, isn't it fabulous? I get to do this right now. You think about, I really wish I could do this all the time. And so you lose out on the joy of the moment of what you really can do. And being upset because it's something you can't do.
That's right.
Yeah, it's replacing, I think we talked about it in here, you gotta replace the sin with something fulfilling immediately, or it'll just keep coming back.
Yeah. The substitution as opposed to extinction.
Yeah.
Extinction's pretty difficult. Substitution.
Well, I mean, in that book that Tommy Dewberry wrote called the 4-8 Principle about focusing all the things that are the joy and so forth that he sets forth in 4-8. And I won't call it a sin, but to your point, I mean, if we're in a mindset of comparison or whatever it may be, then obviously we're not in a mindset of joy. And so I think we have to come to this place where our joy and our peace and our contentment in life is being derived through our relationship with Christ, not through some outside thing, whether it's the Butler cabinet or whatever it may be. I mean, we've got to be, like Paul says, I've learned to be content in all circumstances, and that's the mindset that we have to take with stuff like this. Because if we don't,
It's never ending.
and the mindset's never ending, but I think we're much, much, much more susceptible to committing these sins. Starting out with these so-called private sins, and then
So this is not thought fully formed, just kind of popped in as you were basically making the point of basically how far away is this kind of thought versus the deed, and I would thinking that, well, it is both not very far away, but it is also very far away. Certainly the more you focus and think about it, then you're narrowing the distance. But look, we're human, and thoughts pop in our heads, and if we treat them as basically, look, that's just one of those things pops in, I'm on to something else. You're very far away at that point. I think if we can also dwell too much on our thought, gosh, how horrible am I to think that? How horrible for that to come into my head? Well, then you're almost overstressing it.
it's like me, I worry that I worry too much.
Yeah.
Well, somebody
Chuck,
said,
so it says in the Bible that worrying is a sin.
Somebody said, I don't know who, but they said birds will land, but don't let them build a nest. Oh yeah. It's going to happen. I mean, a thought will pop in, but we can say, okay, popped in, go. Or you can dwell.
Oh no, and that's certainly true. And I don't think that's not really what I'm intended to talk about here. The stuff that pops in and pops out. But as long as you don't land on it for too long. But I think you still have to be careful, because if it's something that's frequently coming in and going back out, even that's potentially a first step towards the next stuff.
But you say, Chuck, how close or how far we are, and I do say this and think it tongue in cheek, but I'm probably farther away from an affair than Matt Lauer was, just because I'm not wealthy and well known and nice looking. I'm saying, my opportunity.
They're all of them.
You're not that ugly.
I'm really envious that they're all of them.
I've always said I would not want to have an affair with a woman who'd have an affair with me.
It's a good way to look at it.
Clearly, you're going to have to lower your standards.
So I do say that tongue in cheek, and I do. You almost feel sometimes for famous people simply because, or well known, just because the temptation. I can't imagine how many women throw themselves at Tom Brady.
Right.
I don't have that issue. I don't walk down. So it's kind of easy, and sometimes you kind of have to be thankful for what you don't have.
Well, I do get that, and that's accurate. However, we've all got our own contexts in which we live. So maybe you're at a cocktail party, or whatever it may be, or maybe you're at a meeting and you have, because I guess the guy that came last year to the breakfast, or maybe 2 years ago, and talked about, he said, I'm the last person on earth you would have ever thought would have gotten into this, and none of us strike up a conversation with a woman intending for it to go down that path. But this guy had a very compelling story. He said we met at a conference, and the next thing you know, we had lunch together, and the next thing you know, it's turned into drinks after work, and before you know it, it's totally off the rails. And so you're right about what you said as far as just the opportunities probably presenting themselves more to a guy like Matt Lauer or Tom Brady, but I think we all have to be conscious of it, because again, I think that's exactly what Satan wants us to think. Is, I'm good on that issue. That's never going to touch us, right? So we got to just be very, very careful. So the next point he gets to is about reputation, and he says reputation is built in a lifetime but damaged in a moment. And he uses David as an example. So when we think about David, probably the first story that would come to our mind is Goliath, right? But what's the second thing that pops into your mind when you consider David?
Bathsheba.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, this is in ancient times, obviously, but you know, the whole story of David and Bathsheba, it's not really too far removed from what we can imagine went on in some of these circumstances. You got this powerful guy, gets his eye on somebody, says, she looks pretty good. I mean, and you can just imagine this happening in 2017. Somebody bring her up here. Somebody bring her in. You know, and then, you know, what happens, and then the next thing you know, you got the whole situation with Uriah, and I mean, then it just has blown up on him. You know, and at that point in time, obviously they didn't have social media and cell phones and all that kind of stuff. But you know, his prophet Nathan came to him and, you know, certainly sort of exposed him or what have you. But we look at him now, I mean, and this is a man after God's own heart, you know, and he did this. And so I think we've all got to be careful about, you know, thinking that we're immune from this in any way. But you know, we do need to consider our reputation. And you know, sometimes I've struggled with that a little bit because I'd like to think that I'm not concerned about what this world might think of me, but you know, I am concerned about people thinking that I'm a person of integrity, you know, and concerned about preserving a reputation as a person of character. But you know, it's like the old saying goes: if you ask somebody, "Have you ever told a lie?" and they say, "Yeah," well, you're a liar. You know, have you ever cheated? Then you're a cheat. You know, and so one of these things, you know, can erase, you know, a lifetime of good work. You know, and then you got our friend Gary down here who told us his story last week. You know, and he made mistakes in his life, but he's turned it into good in his life. You know, but you may be the exception rather than the rule when it comes to that kind of stuff.
I'm not.
Well, good. I'm happy to hear that.
No, but I also think that, you know, I always say when no one else is around, who are we? And some of the hardest things in the world to be is to be always righteous and always good, and it just doesn't happen. You know, we live in a world that requires us to lie. What is this, a little lie? Just to try to get it over? So it's hard. You know, it's hard to tell some people the truth sometimes. You know, if your wife asks you, how do I look in this dress? You know, how do you go about that?
Crazy.
Leave the
You
room.
look fantastic.
Act like you didn't hear it.
Next question.
Yeah, I know we're gonna deal with something difficult.
It's a lie. Lie is a lie, they say. But I mean, I just say that because one of the reasons I never wanted to be a pastor, even when I came here, I never said I'm a pastor. And one of those reasons is because I'm not a perfect guy. I just a guy like everybody else. I just took the task on of doing God's will, and that's hard to keep up.
You know, and the reputational piece, you know, whatever you may think of it yourself, I mean, think about those around you. Think about those who respect you. I mean, I think about my kids. You know, so what if I, you know, I mean, I'll take cheating on their mother away because that's just such a personal thing. But you know, what if I was accused of cheating in a business deal, or you know, something along those lines, some sort of white collar crime, and my name was in the papers or whatever. You know, my kids saw that. I mean, how does that reflect? You know, going back to the whole generational thing. Yeah, my dad was a white collar criminal. I mean, how does that go? I mean, so.
Think about where in the Bible some of the fiercest punishment is reserved for a certain type of person. That is a person who basically encourages, directs, you know, moves another person to sin. And so if, you know, we hold ourselves out to a certain person and then we, you know, you have a big event like that, then, you know, we're now, I think, encouraging others that will, you know, look at him.
He did it.
You know, and so you talk about reputational, I mean, in effect, I mean, you're tarnishing the reputation of God.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
And now granted, you know, it's hard here on earth to see that, And it's much more easy to see, well, I'm tarnishing my personal reputation, I'm tarnishing the reputation of my family. But the much worse tarnish, is really, the worst result is tarnishing the reputation of God. And it's tough to look that far, to that point, but that's really the worst part of it.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in making disciples for Christ is the hypocrisy that exists so much within the church. And when I say that, I mean, just what you were just saying, I'm trying to minister to somebody or make disciples of Christ. And then if I go out and do something that's completely un-Christ-like, and again, I know I'm a sinner, but you're right, I've sort of ruined my witness at that point. If that person knows that I've done this. And it's hard because I think we need to, on this reputational piece, I think maybe the best thing we can strive for is to have a reputation of humility, a reputation that we were humble. Because if we're leading from a position of humility, then I think we're going to be a lot better served than trying to lead from a position of, whether you want to call it power or righteousness or whatever. Because the minute you try to lead from a position of righteousness, you're just opening yourself up and you get tagged and then you've kind of ruined everything. Whereas if you're leading from a position of humility, it's like the Pharisee and the tax collector on the corner. If you're leading from a position of humility and you tell those to whom you're ministering, gosh, I'm as flawed as they come, I think that's much more powerful.
Using that example of kind of like what's going on in the popular eye right now, you look at how Billy Bush handled that situation, and the result of that, and the different directions he could have gone when he heard what he heard, and the results of what happened to him.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty interesting, and we're all in that position a lot with our friends, in front of our friends will do something. I'm always at a crossroad when my friend crosses that line, and it's like, how do you approach it from a place of righteousness? That doesn't always work.
I mean, another thing that's always sort of front of mind for me, and it makes me a little bit nervous, is that, the more light that we're given, the higher calling, the higher charge that we have. And, and again, my kids are a good example. I try to tell my kids, what it looks like to be Christ-like. Not that they put me on a pedestal because they're old enough now to they know my flaws. But I mean, if we profess to be men of character and men of strong faith, that comes with an elevated obligation to the way you live. And sometimes that's hard. And sometimes you wish it wasn't that way. I told somebody this the other day, I said the Bible says a lot of things that I wish it didn't say, but it does. Because I get convicted of stuff, that's sinful.
But having an understanding of what you just described, though, a lot of times makes some decisions really easy.
Yeah.
Makes what?
Some decisions easy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't have that thought. I can't advance that thought another second in my mind because of what you're saying and what Boyd is saying. We're called to be witnesses, and what you said really well, which is to negatively impact or spreading of God's word by our actions, I don't think probably makes God really happy.
I got a text, and got it a week or so ago. In fact, I still kept it on the phone. This person sent me a text and said, I didn't do this. I was supposed to, but I told this person that I did. If they ask you, tell them I did.
Wow. And they put it in
Implicating you in
They really trust you.
And I'm still pissed off about it. I can't answer them. I'm like, who are you to even ask me to do something? Yeah, it just really made me angry.
I think you meant this text for another.
Yeah. You might have meant this for an asshole like you. But you know, you said it a little bit, lying is so pervasive in our culture, perhaps more so than sexual abuse, but it's just pervasive. And people, you know, think about all the scandals we went through with O'Leary and other people that falsified their resumes, just regularly do that. My oldest son worked in the loan industry before that bubble problem happened, and the company he was working for they processed loans. The best thing to make a loan application go through was white out. Change the numbers, photocopy it, send it through, and he wouldn't do it, so they moved him out of the department. Took him out of the department because they need to get up so many loans going through.
I think the truth, you have to be able to tell somebody the truth. Like, I have men that I could call, that I can just say, hey man, this is what I did today. This is where I am. And for them, you know, to be able to respond and know who you are inside of that, and be able to advise you. You know, have you thought about looking at it like this? Have you thought about, you know, going back and just saying, I'm sorry? To tell you something happened to me the other day. It's funny you said it that way. I'm a contractor, you know, besides, I've been doing that for 20 years, besides being a pastor. And I had a sales rep to call me the other day, and Sherwin-Williams bought Duron. I had an account with Duron when they went out of business. Nobody ever called, never said anything. So I owed them like $800. Never got a peep or word from them. Well, since Sherwin-Williams bought the account, now it came up and said, hey, is this you? And I wanted to so bad say no. It wasn't my phone number, it's not my address, because that was my business address and phone number, you know, 12 years ago. And I just wanted to say no, and I said, let me call you back on that. And I called her back the next day and I said, I really wanted to say no yesterday, but it's me. So what do we need to rectify? So I'm thinking they're gonna say, pay the $800. And instead they said, tell you what, since the account is so old, we appreciate your business. Just keep doing business with us. Now suppose I would have said no, it would have still been hanging out there instead of it being rectified. Just, sometimes you just have to just tell the truth. When my wife put on that dress and she asked me that question, I don't say anything. So she know if I don't say anything, that's not good. So I've explained that. If I don't say anything, because I don't want words to be, you know, kind of imprinted in your mind forever, I just won't say anything.
Forever.
Interesting choice is always a good response.
Interesting choice. I like that.
But you know, I think that is playing to the audience of one, though. I mean, and to both of y'all's stories, I think sometimes acting with integrity, sometimes acting to preserve our reputation, it may cost us the worldly goods. I mean, because you might have said it and they said, well, okay, you need to pay the $800. I mean, but it still would have been the right decision to do what you had done. I mean, I'll give you, I think I probably told this to y'all when it happened, but this has been a number of years ago now. And I don't say this to pat myself on the back, but just as an example of this. So I went to Costco, you know, and they sell those movie gift cards like to AMC. And you pick up a little cardboard piece and you take it up to the checkout counter and they give you a little packet of the passes. So I went up there and I bought, let's call it 2. And I walked out and I realized that they had given me like 4 because they're kind of glossy and they were stuck together. And so they had given me more than what I had paid for. And I stopped my car in the parking lot and walked 2 of them back in and said, hey, these were extra ones that I, you know, didn't pay for. And the truth is, and again, I don't say this to pat myself on the back, but nobody ever would have known, nobody could have possibly known other than me and God, but it would have just driven me crazy to think that I had ripped them off. I mean, you know, again, I guess it would have left my mind ultimately, But I mean, it's kind of like what you're talking about. It would have just stewed me. I mean, not that it even would have been anything hanging out there, but it would have just bothered me that I'd done it. So,
But you didn't. I mean, to me, it's binary, because when you do the right thing, it's absolutely, there may be some short-term pain, but it certainly feels good. None of that, I don't worry about that, on the next thing. It's just,
yeah, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, and it wasn't even any short-term pain other than just the inconvenience of having to walk back into this. I mean, there's nothing to it. But yeah, I mean, but the angst that I would have felt had I not done it, I mean, probably would be going on to this day. I mean,
Gary, if you hadn't cleared that up every time you went into Sherwood-Williams. Oh God, they're gonna find me. The days and days.
Well, it's an amazing thing when, like, I used to lie for lie's sake. And I never forget when I kind of just lied one day and I heard it. I said, why did I tell that lie? It didn't make sense. So I have this little thing, I said, I save my lies till I need them. And I guess it's my way of saying, I'm not gonna tell you I won't lie. Because if you say that, then you just told a lie. That's scripture. And I'll tell you a little small story and what happened. I was in Virginia with a friend of mine. He happened to be a white guy. We were doing prison work together. And we're coming out of Virginia. I'm driving. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. He has a 9mm in his glove box. I'm a convicted felon. I don't suppose to know that 9mm was in that glove box. So when the police officer stopped me for doing 78 and a 65, I pulled over and, he asked for his registration and things like that. So he looked in his armrest for his registration, wasn't there. So he looked in his wallet, wasn't there. So the officer said, well, look in your glove box. And he said, I know it's not in there because I would never put it in there. And the officer insisted, look in your glove box. So now I'm looking in the rearview mirror because I'm the one driving and he's on my side. And I see like 4 other officers pulling up. We're in Northern Virginia, Commonwealth. I'm an African American. That's a convicted felon and there's a 9mm in the glove box. Well, when the other officer, his superior came, he came around to his side, he told him, drop the glove box, he did. Asked us to get out of the car, got to the back of the car, he said, did you know that 9mm was in that glove box? And I politely looked at him in his eyes and said, absolutely not. Because I didn't want to go to jail that night, didn't make sense. So I could tell the truth in that moment and just say, I told the truth, but that's gonna cost me. So instead, I said, absolutely not. And there's nothing you can do to tell me any different. It's his car, it's in front of him, I just happen to be driving. I had no idea that it was over there. So he asked him, did he know that the gun was there? He said, I never told him. I just have it for my protection. He had his, right to be able to bear arms. And I got my ticket and we went on down the highway. But in a case like that, what do you tell me? Say, well, just tell the truth. I will not. Don't make sense.
was the registration in there?
No. It was at
I was
home.
kind of worried about that. Thanks for clearing that up.
He said, registration wasn't, that was the truth.
Yeah,
It wasn't.
he wouldn't lie.
He just didn't want to drop the glove box because now he know I'm a convicted felon. That's part of our story. We do prison work together, so part of my story is I'm a convicted felon. He just had bought the gun, literally, like 3 or 4 days before. Took it to the gun range, left it in his glove box. But it was locked, which was good. The glove box was locked, and I was having to be driving. I wasn't sitting in front of it.
well, for what it's worth, I would have done the same thing.
Right.
Is that the right answer?
Let me add, because to take that particular situation now, you made me think of Joseph. When he could have gotten out of his deal, right? But what the blessing occurred because he didn't. Again, probably would have done the same thing in your situation. But then you wonder, like, are there circumstances that occur? It seemed like in the short term it's going to be a very difficult outcome. But do we follow the commandment of do not lie? Because there's this even greater outcome on top of we may not even get the outcome here in this life. Again, if I'm you at 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm probably doing exactly what you.
And I wouldn't tell you all the God in me is not gonna tell me to say yes on the side of the road.
Well, it's interesting you said that because
No.
I say about so many different things that it's critical that we have an ongoing, personal, close relationship with Christ. And so you were faced with that moment at that point in time, and I don't know if you said a prayer right in that instant or not.
I said several prayers.
Yeah.
But
Without ceasing.
you know, but I would dare say, I mean, to your point, I think if you were abiding in Christ at that point in your life, and at that moment, that's what you were led to do, and then maybe that was the right path.
You got the case of the midwives too, when Moses was born.
Oh, yeah.
They
Oh, yeah.
lied,
I mean,
right?
Yeah.
So, and is that biblical to do it? I mean, I don't think that God's ordaining that lie, but you know, he will prevail in whatever occurrence is going to happen. So, to your point, you know, praying, I do think at the end of the day, you know, we follow the commandments and let the chips fall where they may. You know.
Could y'all put the gun in the trunk?
They made us put it in the trunk. Made us take the clip out,
I-
the chamber.
I guess what I'm saying is, did nobody ever stop and think about that when you're driving down the road? I mean, that would have been my thought. Take this gun, take the clip out, and take the clip, put it in the trunk, lock it up. Now it's not with you.
I really didn't think about it.
Hindsight's always 20/20.
That's right.
If I'm a convicted felon, I am thinking of those things.
I just don't carry a gun.
No,
Yeah.
no.
So, you know, I knew it was his. You know, it's your car, it's your gun. I can't tell you. I know you can keep them in the glove box, though. You just have to have it locked. So it was locked, you know, so forth and so on. I'm just glad I wasn't sitting in front of him.
It'd be interesting as you sit there and say, well, is there such a thing as a good lie? You know, that's a good lie. I mean, you think about it. I mean, what good would have come out of telling the truth out of that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but to Neil's point, Joseph may have had that same mindset, but he did anyway. I don't know. Maybe no good would have come out of it other than you get to the judgment seat one day and you get a thumbs up for being truthful at that point in time. But I can only imagine that your wife and kids are like, why on earth didn't you just say that? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, it just, at that moment in time, it did not make sense to
I
tell the truth.
mean, all right, so you'll take it to the great, you know, level here. All right, so you're sitting there and you're in Belgium and you're harboring Jews in your attic. Do you have any Jews? No.
That's what the midwives did, right?
Yeah.
With Moses, because they asked him.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah. So I think it's a great story, and it's an appropriate thing to realize that, you know, it's everything is not clear cut.
no, that's right.
You know, but you know,
So the best thing is just deny and stand by it. That's what Roy Moore did.
it's not the way I remember it.
Yeah, that's it.
If you believe it, it must be true.
So that's a slippery slope.
That's
When we
the
start
slope.
going,
It is.
then once there's a credible, you know, then all of a sudden we as humans can just go, oh well, maybe this is one of those cases I'm going to take the easy way out. And that's the danger of any of the greatness of, I think, of God's word.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of slippery.
I think you got to be really careful with that. I think black and white determination is. I mean, I found in my life that you know, saying I would never do something,
Never.
that hadn't worked out too well.
Never.
I'm reminded, this football player played for Alex somebody, but the great story where he comes in and his wife finds him outside and he said, well, I got in late, I didn't have my keys, so I just slept in the hammock. He said, Alex, we got rid of the hammock 2 months ago. He said, that's my story, and I'm sticking by it.
Alex Hawkins.
Alex Hawkins, thank you. Yeah.
I mean, you know, this hour has been more about kind of big picture stuff. I don't think there's any probability about it with me. I'm almost certain that I would have done what you did in that instance. You know, right, wrong, indifferent, or whatever. You know, I don't know.
I'd have backed you up too, I just want you to know.
All right, so that's a good segue into the last point about learning from the failures of others. And when I think about this comments about we must admit that we're also sinners. And so I often struggle with the line between judging versus holding somebody accountable versus, you know, our own introspection. And I'm a firm believer that one sin is no greater or no less than the next sin. And so, you know, it's the whole get the log out of your own eye before you talk about the speck in somebody else's. And so I'm always very mindful of that. But there's also, I think, a duty, especially to friends, to call somebody and hold somebody accountable, you know, for their sins. You know, in humility, I mean, and not in self-righteousness, but I think we do have that obligation.
You know, you make me think, one of my favorite habits, the 7 habits, is people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. So I think if we are somewhat judging, then we probably need to stop thinking right then. But however, if you're doing something and because I care about you, I'm really concerned about the outcome of your, you know, then that's a complete, I think that's a, you know, then I'm going to have the conversation. But it's not, I think it's obvious it's not from a judgmental way. It's just a, hey, I'm right there with you, but I care about you. If there's no care in my judgment, I need to move on, you know.
I got one more story, and I'll brag on my brother. He's my senior by 9 years, but he came in very late one night, and he's getting into the bed, just sat down on the side of the bed to take his shoes off, and his wife woke up, and she said, "You going to work so early?" And he said, "Yeah, I am. Got to watch."
Hey, you're wearing the same clothes you wore yesterday.
Say we don't want.
So I mean, so how does that play out in y'all's lives? I mean, you have people in your lives that you hold accountable, that hold you accountable. You know, without being judgmental of them. I mean, do you talk to them about their struggles? Nobody. But I mean, I think you make a good point though. I mean, I'm holding you accountable because I love you and I want what's best for you, not because I'm being critical because I'm a sinner myself.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, my sin may be different. I mean, I may not understand your sin, but I, you know, I get it. I mean, we've got a common friend that struggles with something, and it's like, it's just never been a struggle for me, but I've got 1,000 other things that are. So, you know, we've got to, you know, speak the truth in love, you know, without coming off as judgmental. And even with something that seems as obvious as the stories that are in the news these days, it would be very easy for me to go to Harvey Weinstein and say, "God, you're a terrible person." It's like,
Without, you know, and in this story that he wrote up, he wrote somewhere how Satan loves to drop a pebble in the lake and watch the ripples, and it's going to come up. And you know, if we don't have someone in our lives like like David, without Nathan, David, it was this great guy, and he didn't even realize that he was sinning until Nathan said it. And again, you know, sin, I don't think from a standpoint of God's going, okay, you did that when you're out. It's just a separation from God. So we don't get the fruit of the Spirit, the love, joy, peace. So we're not in a state of peace at that moment in time. So why wouldn't we want a friend to lovingly say, you know, you probably don't realize it. Let's just say that. I mean, or if you did, you probably wouldn't keep on doing it. But, you know, we all need that friend because we're human.
It's rare to find someone who says something, even your friend.
Yeah.
You're out of line last night, or, you know, I mean, people just kind of let it go.
Because they don't want to sound like they're judgmental. But true love would have that conversation, you know.
and then some people love so hard, and they call it true love when actually they're really judging. I guess it's hard to differentiate between which one is which one is so. But again, I think that all of us should have someone, whether it's 1, 5, 10. I have a lot of people. I've met a lot of people along the journey. I have a lot of people that hold me accountable. When I jack it up, I just call somebody and tell them, hey man, I just jacked it up. And, they help me through it. They talk me through it. Sometimes they say, well, you didn't do, much wrong. That's normal. That's life. Then others will say, yeah, you just jacked that up. What we need to do is fix it. I think telling yourself the truth is being truthful to yourself first is probably the most honorable thing you can do for yourself and God and for other people. I'm not one that, even in my preaching, I'm not a, hellfire and brimstone. Cause when I look inward, I said, if I'm gonna throw fire, I'm gonna burn up myself. So it don't make sense to burn yourself up. But the reality of it is, when you're truthful with yourself, then you can do that in love. You can do that in humility. You can do that in honor, and be able to still, live inside of yourself. So I'm honest enough with myself to know that I'm no perfect dude. I'm not Jesus. I wasn't reincarnated. But I also don't kick myself in the butt so bad that I'm always in the dump about, man, I just thought about lying and it's gonna eat me alive. I don't allow it to do that to me. So.
Well, and I think, I know we have all got blind spots. I mean, to your point about David and Nathan, we've all got these blind spots. But I think if we were seeking to walk in the Spirit rather than walking in the flesh, that more often than not, we're going to be convicted by God, by the Spirit, of stuff that we're doing that's not just right. And so again, I just kind of go back to the importance of a personal relationship. I've lost my train of thought now, but
Welcome to my world.
I'd say what it was. We've all heard Ken talking here, and if you get his daily devotional, he says it a lot about, pray that the Spirit will show you areas of unconfessed sin. And I've read in another context that it being referred to as hidden sin. And there is a subtle distinction, I think, between unconfessed and hidden, in that I think unconfessed is something that you may have been, that you may be aware of, but you're still not confessing it, confronting it. Whereas hidden is that blind spot I was talking about. Hidden may be something that you're doing and you're totally clueless about it being sinful, and you need somebody from the outside to say, you need to rethink this. You need to kind of be on a different path when it comes to this. And ever since I started praying that prayer, it's amazing how much stuff has come to my mind. And I'm like, gosh, that's not good. And I can look back in my life 20 years ago and look at crap that I was doing. And at that point in time, it's like, well, there's nothing wrong with this. And I look at it now and go, oh my gosh, can you believe I was doing it? Anything else?
I feel like the biggest benefit that you see from having accountability partners and stuff like that comes from them noticing the little stuff that you overlook. 'Cause if you have a big sin or whatever, you recognize that, it's pretty apparent. But for me with my addiction and everything, it's easy to notice when I relapse, that's bad. But not the stuff leading up to it. I miss that stuff a lot, the things that might have led me to that. And that's where I see the accountability partners having the biggest benefit, is pointing that stuff out to you. The prelim sins.
Right.
It's that subtle stuff, because that's the killer of the subtle stuff. You just kind of inch here. It's like the frog in the water. You wouldn't do
baby
it.
steps.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Those are the big ones, because they're subtle.
And we talk about that a lot in here. None of us jump right into the ditch.
Yeah.
We just move a little bit before we know it, we're in the ditch.
Yeah.
You might be better off just jumping in. That's what I found in my life is, I'm better off just jumping in than I am drifting, because when you drift, like, I'll never forget a time when I was young, and I knew how to swim, but I never really swam in the beach. You know, I swam in lakes and pools and things of that nature. Well, I went to the beach one day with my older stepbrother, and I was out there, I had my back to the shore, and literally, you know, you just kind of getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and before I know it, when I looked around, I had to be about a couple hundred yards away from the shore, and it still was, you know, shallow enough that I could get back, and then I didn't understand how to swim along with the current, like side of the current, and I'm trying to swim back through it, and I panicked. And, you know, thank God that I was able to just kind of stand and like, okay, I still can stand up. But it just seems so far away. But it's the drifting part that kind of, you need somebody to say, hey, you're drifting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you notice how far you're getting out. Look around, you're drifting. And I think that's, you know, that's the part that all of us need. You need somebody that loves you enough to be able to just see when you're drifting, not when you just jump in. You're gonna just jump in, that's one thing, you know, but you know that I'm getting ready to jump in.
Right.
But it's the difference between when they see it kind of coming and you don't.
Thank y'all for all the input. Prayer requests or announcements?
I actually have a couple of prayer requests. It's been a crazy week. After last Friday, I had a family call me after the Georgia game. It was really before day Sunday morning. A young man had overdosed. He went out and celebrated. He had a problem with addiction, and had been 2 years clean. He was in drug court, so they kind of keep up with you, knowing that you're clean. And that next morning, after the Georgia, SEC championship game, they found him dead. So that's been a rough one. And then Monday morning, I get a call. A good friend of mine named is James Jones. His wife woke up, and he's usually up around early in the morning, and he was just non-responsive. Called ambulance, got into the hospital. They got him back responsive, but he had a blood clot in his leg that went to his lung, and it killed him. So it's been kind of one of those weeks of, just one thing after the next. Then another family, which wasn't as bad as though, none is good. Death is not good, but the Gamble family, they decided to take their father and husband off of dialysis because he was 78, and then now his life was, just kind of laying there, and couldn't breathe on his own, couldn't eat on his own. So they decided to stop dialysis, and they say he just fell asleep basically.
How did Carver do?
Say it again.
How'd the football game come out?
Oh, down in Carver?
Yeah.
They lost.
You did have a bad day.
Warner Robins, that's a tall task.
It's a tall task.
Yeah.
Now the craziest thing is, you talk about, just kind of integrity. Warner Robins have 17 kids from another local high school that he took their senior year. So he went from like 11 seniors to 31 seniors. And that's how he stacked the deck. Wow. Jake Fromm's twin brothers are there. And then they have some other kids that are kind of, top athletes in the state.
So what was Carver's record 2 years ago?
They're always pretty decent.
Are they?
Yeah, they're always like 8-2, things of that nature. So they'll make it to the playoffs, but they always lose in the first round, things of that nature. So in the city, they usually do pretty well. So they're 7-3, 8-2. They usually do pretty well. But they were, until that game, they were 12-1. So they only had lost one game to Alexander out of Douglasville. Yeah, but that was a rough week.
Anybody else?
Yeah, for my sister, she just doesn't have a great community up in Chicago. So prayers for her to find a good community up there.
What's her name?
Molly. Yeah.
That's a challenge.
I have a friend named Bob Lanier who just had a big surgery and he's recovering from it. Pray for him.
quick. Chuck Waters.
Gary England.
Fred Glass. Gary Burke.
Rob Moran.
Joe Johnson.
Boyd Johnson.
Jeff Wisely.
Jim Bracewell.
Chester Thrash.
John Muirhead.
Tom Pritchard.
Neil Creech.
Ace Wilson.
I'd like to close. It's true, Gary.
He's here.
Amen. Let's go to God. God, we thank you for this time that we get a chance again to spend one to another. We thank you for the truthfulness in the room. God, we thank you that you would have Molly to find a great community in Chicago. And we also know that you are the ultimate physician to make sure that Bob's surgery and recovery goes well. God, I have personal things that have happened all week, but you are still God all by yourself. You take care of those bereaved families the way that you can and the way that we help you to do so. God, help all of us to be better men leaving here than we came in. In your Son's spirit we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, John.
Congratulations on your